"I just need some time, Wes, to think, please." That was all she said. No explanation. No tears. Just those two sentences and a small bag she'd packed the night before while I pretended to sleep. My wife of 31 years walked out the front door on a Tuesday morning in October, and I stood in the kitchen holding a coffee mug that had gone cold, listening to the sound of her car backing down the driveway. I want to be honest with you about something. My first thought wasn't panic. It wasn't even sadness. It was confusion, so deep it felt physical. Like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged things. Because in 31 years, my wife had never once been a person who needed space. She was the one who called me twice when I traveled for work. She was the one who moved her chair closer to mine at restaurants without realizing she was doing it. Space was not something Lorene had ever wanted from me. So I stood there in that kitchen and I thought, something is wrong. Not with us. With her. I didn't call her right away. She'd asked for time. I gave her the first day. By the second day, I called twice. Both went to voicemail. I left one message, kept it short, told her I loved her, and I was here when she was ready. I didn't leave a second message. I didn't want her to feel crowded. By the fourth day, I stopped eating real meals. I was making toast and calling it dinner. Our daughter Becca called me from Portland, and I told her everything was fine. Her mom just needed a few days. I don't know why I protected Lorene's absence from our own children. Some instinct, I suppose, the same one that makes you close the blinds before you cry. On the sixth day, a letter came. Not an email. A letter, printed on paper in an envelope with our attorney's return address in the corner. I knew what it was before I opened it. I sat down at the kitchen table and I opened it anyway. Petition for dissolution of marriage. 31 years. Filed on a Thursday. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it exactly the way it had come and put it back in the envelope, and I sat at that table for a very long time. Here's what I want you to understand about who Lorene is. She taught 3rd grade for 22 years. She still writes birthday cards by hand. She cries at commercials, not the sad ones, the ones with dogs reuniting with soldiers. She is the most deliberate, thoughtful person I have ever known. She does not make decisions without thinking them through completely, which meant that whatever was making her do this had been living inside her for some time, and she had decided there was no other way. That told me more than the letter did. I didn't sign the papers. I set them on the kitchen counter and I left them there. And that night, I did something I almost never do. I went into my home office, sat down at my desk, and I pulled up the old security system we'd had installed 5 years back when there was a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. We'd forgotten about it almost entirely. Lauren had asked me once to disable the interior cameras because she said it made her feel watched in her own home, and I'd switched off most of them. But the one in my office, I'd left it running because it was connected to the exterior sensor, and I never bothered to separate the two. I wasn't looking for evidence of anything. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't suspicious of Lorene. I didn't think she was having an affair, didn't think she was hiding money. I needed to understand. I needed to find the moment. The thing I'd missed. I scrolled back through the footage from the past 6 weeks. Most of it was nothing. Me at my desk, the cleaning lady on Thursdays, the dog sleeping on the rug. And then I found it. 3 weeks before she left. The footage was from a Wednesday afternoon. I'd been at the hardware store. I remember because I'd gone to pick up caulk for the upstairs bathroom, a completely unremarkable errand. Lorene was supposed to be at her book club, but there she was in my office, sitting in my chair. And across from her, on the other side of my desk, was a man I didn't recognize. He was somewhere in his 50s, heavy-set, wearing a gray jacket. He had a tablet in his hand, and he was showing her something on the screen. I watched her face change as she looked at it. She put her hand over her mouth. She shook her head. I turned up the audio. Going to want to think very carefully about what happens next. the man was saying. His voice was flat, unhurried. The voice of someone who'd had this conversation before. That was a long time ago, Lorraine said. That was before Wes, before any of this. I understand that, he said. But your husband's a partner at a firm with a pretty public profile, and your son-in-law just announced a run for state senate. I think you understand how these things travel. Lorraine was quiet for a long moment. What do you want? She said. What I want is very simple, he said. I want you to end the marriage, file the papers, move out, and make it clean. No contested divorce, no drawn-out legal proceedings, quick and quiet. And if I do that, then what I have stays private. And if I don't, he picked up the tablet. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Lorraine sat very still for a long time after he left. Then she put her face in her hands, and she stayed like that for almost 5 minutes. I watched the clock in the corner of the footage. 5 minutes and 14 seconds. I paused the video. I sat back in my chair, and I looked at the ceiling of my office, and I breathed. In, out. My wife wasn't leaving me. My wife was trying to save me. She thought whatever this man had on her was enough to destroy my career, our son-in-law's campaign, our family's reputation. And rather than put any of that at risk, she had decided to sacrifice 31 years of marriage. She had made that calculation alone in silence, and she had decided I was worth more to her than her own happiness. I sat with that for a while, the grief of it, the love of it. And then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. His name is Dale Murchison, and he's been my personal attorney for 19 years. I called him at 8:45 on a Thursday night, and he answered on the second ring, which is one of the reasons I've kept him for 19 years. "Don't sign anything," was the first thing he said after I'd explained what I'd found. "Don't contact your wife tonight. Don't contact anyone connected to this. Can you send me the footage?" I sent it within the hour. By Friday morning, Dale had watched it and called me back. "Wesley," he said, "what this man did in your home is extortion. It's a federal offense. I want you to sit tight and let me make some calls. Don't, and I mean this, don't call Lorraine yet." I asked him why not. "Because if she knows you know, she may do something that complicates the legal position. Let me find out who this man is first." I didn't like it. I wanted to call my wife. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to do this alone. But I trusted Dale, and I waited. It took him 4 days. The man in the gray jacket had a name, Clifford Emery. He was a private investigator, formally licensed in 3 states, stripped of his license in 1, who had spent the last several years operating what amounted to a targeted blackmail operation. He found women with something in their past, an affair, an old legal matter, something they'd buried before they built the life they had now. He'd approached them with evidence and a demand, and the demand was almost never money. He wanted leverage. He collected ruined marriages the way some men collect debts. Dale found out something else, something that changed everything. Lauren was not the first. Through some investigative work I won't pretend to fully understand, Dale and the private investigator he'd hired identified 4 other women in our region who had been approached by Emery in the past 2 years. 2 of them had complied. Their marriages had ended quietly. 2 of them had refused and had subsequently had damaging personal information leaked to their communities. Every one of them had stayed silent because they were ashamed, because they had something in their past they'd spent decades moving away from. Because Emery understood that shame is its own kind of prison, and he was very good at building cells. I asked Dale what Emery had on Lorraine. Dale was quiet for a moment. "That's something you'll need to ask her yourself," he said. "What I can tell you is that it was from a period of her life before she knew you, and it has no bearing on anything she has ever done as your wife, as a mother, or as a person." That was enough for me. In 31 years, I had learned exactly who Lorraine was. I knew her the way you know the layout of a house you've lived in for decades, not by thinking about it, but by moving through it in the dark without stumbling. Whatever had happened to her before she was mine was not mine to judge. The person I had built a life with was the only testimony I needed. Dale filed a complaint with the district attorney's office. The footage from my office camera was submitted as evidence. It took another 11 days, but Clifford Emery was arrested at his home, a rented house about 40 miles east of us, on 2 counts of extortion and 1 count of criminal coercion. When investigators examined his records, they found documentation on 9 women in total, 9 families he had targeted, 9 lives he had tried to take apart. During those 11 days, I did not contact Lorraine. I want to tell you that I handled that with grace. I didn't. I handled it badly. I drove past the apartment complex where she was staying. I had found the address through a roundabout way I'm not proud of. And I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I drove back home. I wasn't going to knock on her door. I just needed to know she was close. On the 12th day, Dale called me and told me the arrest had been made, and I could now speak with my wife. I thought about what I was going to say on the drive over. I had whole speeches prepared, things about trust, about partnership, about never having to carry anything alone, things I meant completely. I knocked on her door. She opened it, and when she saw me standing there, she went white. Wes. I know, I said. I know everything. She looked at me for a long time. I watched her face move through things I don't have words for. Come inside, she finally said. She'd been staying in a furnished apartment. 1 bedroom, a couch that wasn't comfortable, blinds that didn't close all the way. It smelled like someone else's laundry detergent. The whole place felt like a waiting room, and I suppose that's what it had been. She sat on the couch. I sat beside her, not across from her, beside her. How did you find out? She asked. I told her about the camera. I watched something shift in her face. Not relief exactly, but something close to it, like a door opening in a room that had been sealed too long. I was afraid, she said. I thought if it came out, your firm, the clients who trust you, Becca's husband and everything he's trying to build. None of that matters more than you. It would have hurt you. Laureen. I took her hand. Look at me. Whatever happened before we met, it belongs to a version of you that existed before I knew you. I don't need to know what it was. I don't want to know unless you want to tell me. But I need you to understand that there is nothing that man could have shown me that would have changed what I know about who you are. She cried, not quietly, the kind of crying that comes from holding something in for too long. And she leaned into me, and I put my arms around her, and we sat like that for a long time in that apartment that smelled like someone else's life. She told me what Emery had on her. I'll honor her privacy by not sharing the details here. What I will say is this. She was 24 years old. She was in a bad situation with a person who wasn't good for her. She made a choice she'd spent the next 37 years quietly carrying. It was a human mistake, the kind that deserves forgiveness, and I gave it without hesitation because there was nothing to forgive. Not to me. Not ever. We talked for 4 hours. We ordered pizza at some point. The bad couch became less uncomfortable. At the end of the night, I asked her to come home. She came home. Clifford Emery was tried in federal court 8 months later. His attorney tried to frame it as a service, exposing dishonesty in marriage, forcing accountability. The prosecutor let the jury hear from 3 of his other victims, women who testified about what it felt like to have someone weaponize the most vulnerable moment of your past against everything you'd built since. Emery was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 11 years. I was in the courtroom for the sentencing. Lorraine was beside me. She held my hand during the whole thing, and when the sentence was read, I felt her exhale. A long, slow exhale like she'd been holding her breath for 8 months. Maybe longer. Our son-in-law won his Senate race. Becca called us the night of the results, and the three of us stayed on the phone for over an hour, laughing about nothing in particular. Lorene had her feet up on the coffee table, and she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in almost a year. I think about those 4 hours we sat in that apartment sometimes. Not the crisis part, not the camera footage, not Dale's phone calls, not the arrest. I think about the moment after I told her nothing he had on her would have changed what I know. The way she looked at me, like she'd handed me something heavy and I'd taken it without flinching. People talk about trust in marriage like it's a feeling, like something you have until you don't. But I've come to think trust is more like a practice, a thing you build the same way you build anything that lasts, slowly, with repetition, with showing up when it would be easier not to. Lauren showed up for me every day of our marriage. She thought she was protecting me by leaving. She was wrong about the method, but she was right about the love. I would have fought for her no matter what he had on her. I would have fought for her with a lot less than a camera. I would have fought for her on nothing but 31 years of knowing who she was. That's the thing this man never understood. He thought he could use our past against us. What he didn't account for is that 31 years of marriage is not a weakness. It's the whole case for the defense. The apartment she rented is still there. Same complex, same faded beige door. I drove past it once a few months after everything was resolved, without really meaning to. I looked at it for a second, and then I kept driving, back home, where the lights were on and the dog was at the door and Lorene was in the kitchen telling me dinner was almost ready. Some things don't need more than that. I still think about that camera sometimes. Not the footage itself, though I've thought about that plenty, but the fact that I almost didn't check it. I almost let 31 years walk out the door because I was trying to be respectful of someone's pain. There's a version of this story where I sign those papers and never know. Where Lorene spends the rest of her life carrying something she never had to carry alone. Where Clifford Emery moves on to the next name on his list. That version almost happened. What stopped it wasn't luck exactly. It was something quieter than that. It was the simple, stubborn knowledge that the woman I married was not capable of the coldness she was showing me. I knew her, not perfectly. No one knows another person perfectly, but well enough to recognize when her behavior didn't match her character. That recognition is what made me pause instead of sign. That's what sent me to the footage. I think the hardest thing about being in a long marriage isn't the conflict. It's learning when to trust what you know about a person over what the evidence seems to say. Emery was counting on the opposite. He was counting on me to look at Lorene's silence, her distance, her sudden decision to end everything, and draw the obvious conclusion. He was counting on me to believe the story the surface was telling instead of the one 31 years had written. He miscalculated, and that miscalculation cost him everything. There's a kind of thinking that takes courage to hold on to, the willingness to say, this doesn't add up even when everyone around you, even the situation itself, is pushing you toward the easier explanation. Dale had it. He didn't hear my story and offer sympathy. He heard it and immediately started asking what could be proven and how. That kind of clear-eyed thinking in the middle of an emotional crisis is rarer than people realize, and it's what turned a home security camera into the piece of evidence that sent a predator to prison. And then there's what Lorene did. I've thought about this a great deal, and I want to be careful how I say it, because it's complicated. What she did. Deciding to sacrifice her marriage rather than risk harm to her family was an act of love. Pure, if misguided, but it also took a particular kind of strength to hold that alone for weeks without breaking. She didn't fall apart. She didn't make it messy. She made a decision she believed was the only one available to her, and she carried it with a steadiness that, even now, I find remarkable. She was wrong about what she needed to do. She was absolutely right about why she was doing it. I used to think resilience was about getting back up after something knocks you down. I've come to think it's more specific than that. It's about staying honest with yourself during the fall. about what you know, what you believe, what you're willing to fight for, so that when you do get back up, you're still standing on solid ground. We came out of this intact, not because the situation resolved neatly, though it did, not because justice was served, though it was. We came out of it intact because three people, Lorene, Dale, and me, each held on to something true when it would have been easier to let go. Lauren held on to her love for our family. Dale held on to the law. I held on to what I knew about my wife. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just what happened in between.